Welcome. I'm Pastor Diana Thompson. I'm an ordained pastor in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. You can see where I'm serving in my bio slide that was just before this video started. I want to welcome you to episode 4 of our Bible study on the Psalms. In today's episode, we're going to look at two types of Psalms. One are Psalms of Thanksgiving, and the second are Royal Psalms. As I have done in our other studies, I'm going to read a psalm as our prayer to open our time together. Today's psalm is Psalm 66. I'll give you a moment to come to that. I encourage you to have paper and pencil or pen. I also encourage you to have a Bible translation of your choice so you can follow along. The paper and pencils for you to write notes, comments, thoughts, reflections, doodles, whatever you need that for. You're welcome to leave comments on the YouTube channel. If you prefer more private conversation, my social media and email will come up at the end of the video. You're welcome to reach out to me that way as well. Again, let us open with prayer using Psalm 66. Make a joyful noise to God, all the earth. Sing the glory of his name. Give to him glorious praise. Say to God, how awesome are your deeds! Because of your great power, your enemies cringe before you. All the earth worships you. They sing praises to you. Sing praises to your name. Come and see what God has done. He is awesome in deeds among mortals. He turned the sea into dry land. They passed through the river on foot. There we rejoiced in him who ruled over his might forever, whose eyes keep watch on the nations. Let the rebellious not exalt themselves. Bless our God, O peoples. Let the sound of his praise be heard, who has kept us among the living and has not let our feet slip. For you, O God, have tested us. You have tried us as silver is tried. You brought us into the net. You laid burdens on our backs. You let people ride over our heads. We went through fire and through water, yet you have brought us out to a spacious place. I will come into your house with burnt offerings. I will pay you my vows, those that my lips uttered, and my mouth promised when I was in trouble. I will offer you burnt offerings of fatlings, with the smoke of the sacrifice of rams. I will make an offering of bull and goats. Come and hear, all you who fear the God, for I will tell what he has done for me. I cry aloud to him, and he was extolled with my tongue. If I had cherished iniquity in my heart, the Lord would not have listened. But truly God has listened. He has given heed to the words of my prayer. Blessed be God, because he has not rejected my prayer or removed his steadfast love from me. Amen. Psalm 66 is one of the examples of our psalm today. It is a song of thanksgiving. And Psalm 66 is unique in the fact that it includes both individual praises and communal praises. So it switches back and forth between an individual praising God and the community praising God. So as we talk about the two types of songs of thanksgiving, Psalm 66 actually fits in both. So one of the joys and challenges of the Psalms is sometimes they don't fit perfectly into one category. And you'll see that as we go through that some of the Psalms that are listed as one type of psalm also has characteristics of another type of psalm. So they might be listed twice, and that's not an error. That just recognizes that they speak to more than one more than one theme. They speak to reach out in more than one way. So sometimes a song of thanksgiving will also have wisdom. So it might be listed as a wisdom psalm and a thanksgiving psalm. So just be aware that they overlap. But just like any good poetry or music, though they might have a central theme, they touch on other themes as well. So just keep that in mind as we go through this. But again, Psalm 66 is one of the unique songs of thanksgiving because it has individual verses and it has communal verses. So as we go through this, kind of think back to Psalm 66 and you'll see how it goes. As I mentioned, there are two types of songs of thanksgiving. There are individual and there are communal. So the individual ones, let me put that slide up for you, are 30, 32, 34, 40, 57, 66, 92, 119, and 138. Just so you know, the slides will also be at the end of the video again, so you can pause it at the end if you want to write any of these down. And then the communal psalms that are songs of thanksgiving are Psalm 66, Psalm 75, and Psalm 107. As you notice, there aren't a huge amount of these songs of thanksgiving in the Psalms compared to some of the other ones, as some of the other Psalms have more of them. But these are psalms that are in response to how God has helped. They usually focus on a time of crisis, either individual or communal. So again, psalms of thanksgiving. We've come out of the crisis. Now we're going to give thanks to God for what God has done. Oftentimes they will include a reference to sacrifice. So as in Psalm 66, verses 13 through 15 talk about the sacrifices that would have been made at the temple as a sign of thanksgiving. So that is one of the characteristics of these psalms. They also include expressions of praise and gratitude to God, which we saw in Psalm 66. They might include a description of the trouble or distress on which the psalmist has been delivered. They will include a testimony to others concerning God's saving deeds. So they want others to emulate this thanksgiving, to understand that God saves in the midst of struggle. And then, of course, they exhort others to join in praising God and acknowledging God's ways. So they want others to become part of this communal experience, even though it might be an individual psalm. There's usually an invitation to speak, encourage others to join in speaking praise to God. So as our breakdown example of a song of thanksgiving, we're going to use Psalm 34. So I'll give you a minute to get to Psalm 34. This is an individual psalm of thanksgiving. It is also, again, an example of an acrostic poem. Remember, acrostics have use initials, to help focus the nature of the psalm. So the content is a song of thanksgiving. The style is an acrostic psalm. And the reason it's considered an acrostic psalm is because the first letters of verse 1, 11, and 22, when they are spelled out, spell the word Aleph. And that is how you spell the first letter in the Hebrew alphabet. So this again creates the acrostic. As we mentioned in the previous episode, that acrostic had every line started with a letter of the alphabet, Hebrew alphabet. This one goes through just using 3. So those would be kind of the 3 key verses. Those would be the areas that would create emphasis. And verse 11 is actually the center of the psalm. So that helps us to understand that there is a pattern to this particular psalm. It also carries some characteristics of wisdom literature as well, or wisdom psalm. So you're going to see a little bit of that. We talked about wisdom psalms in a previous episode, so you can go back and review that if you need to. So again, as I mentioned, this is a song of thanksgiving, but it does carry some wisdom literature with it. but it is an expression that starts with an intent to praise God. So we see that in verse 1 and 3. So let me read Psalm 34 for you, and then we will enter into kind of the breakdown. So listen for the characteristics of an expression of praise and gratitude, a description of the trouble or distress, a testimony to others concerning God's work, an exhortation to join in praising, and then the suggestion of some sort of sacrifice in the temple. So this is Psalm 34. I will bless the Lord at all times. My praise shall continually be in my mouth. My soul makes its boast in the Lord. Let the humble hear and be glad. O magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. I sought the Lord, and he answered me, and delivered me from all my fears. Look to him and be radiant, so your faces shall never be ashamed. This poor soul cried and was heard by the Lord, and was saved from every trouble. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and delivers them. O taste and see that the Lord is good. Happy are those who take refuge in him. O fear the Lord, you holy ones, for those who fear him have no want. The young lions suffer want and hunger, but those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. Come, O children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord. Which of you desires life, and covets many days to enjoy good? Keep your tongue from evil, and your lips from speaking deceit. Depart from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their cries. The face of the Lord is against evildoers, to cut off the remembrance of them from the earth. When the righteous cry for help, the Lord hears and rescues them from all their troubles. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord rescues them from all. He keeps all their bones, not one of them will be broken. Evil brings death to the wicked, and those who hate the righteous will be condemned. The Lord redeems the life of his servants. None of those who take refuge in him will be condemned. Now, as we notice, the idea of discussing the reason for the trouble and deliverance, this psalmist is not particular. He just does mention that there is deliverance from trouble, but he starts out with this expression of praise and gratitude. I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. So he is showing that expression of praise, and he repeats that a few more times. In verse 3, though, he invites others into this praising of God. Right in verse 3, he says, "Oh, magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together." And then, of course, he does talk about God's redeeming work in verses 4 through 10. And then in verses 11 through 14, he talks about how he is going to live out this psalm. He's going to teach. He's going to guide. And again, this is where it comes into some wisdom, as these are wisdom phrases and ideas. So let's go back a little bit and let's reflect on a few things. So in verses 1 through 3, the word blessed in here, remember before blessed meant like happy? Blessed or happy are those. In this, the word that is used for blessed is also the same root word as boast. They come from the same Hebrew root word. So what they mean is to praise God, to praise. It's actually a what's the best way? Breaking it down kind of in a literal sense is to kneel before the one who reigns, to kneel before the sovereign. So bless the Lord. Giving praise to the one who is your king, your ruler, the one you pledge your loyalty to. So this is where that praise and bless. So we're not the ones getting blessed. We're the ones who are blessing. We are praising. We will show our praise to God, our blessed. We will bless God, which I know seems strange because we use blessed as like it's a way that we're rewarded, and this actually is blessed is another way to say praise, give honor, be humble before God. So this is all about God and not about the psalmist right now. Of course, with the idea of being humble before God it also reminds us that God is always the one who's looking for the one who's humble, afflicted, oppressed. We see that in other psalms as well. But we are immediately invited to join this psalmist in praising God ourselves, to see our need for God, as I mentioned in verse 3. And of course, the psalmist is offering their life and their praise. And he does this, or she does this, not as something arrogant, like, look at me, but, instead to be a testimony to what God has done. Look what God has done for me, not because I was worthy of it, because this is who God is. And I think that's really important, and I think that's important in our faith life too, is when we talk about what God has done for us, it's not meant to make people look at us, but actually make people look at God. This is what I've gone through, and God was present with me in that. God has gotten me through that. So don't look at me and say, wow, you're really brave, when you want them to say, look what God got me through. I was only brave because of what the Lord did for me. I only survived because of what the Lord did for me. And I think that's really one of the key things in all of these songs of thanksgiving, is that they are never focused on the person. They are always putting people's focus on God. They're turning their focus to the Lord. And I think that's really important for us to understand and reflect on, especially in our lives as people of faith who want to talk about our faith with other people. We always want to make sure that what we are saying doesn't make people praise us, but instead says, wow, if God can do that in you, can God do that in me? Again, it turns the focus onto what God does, not who we are or what we've become. It's always about what God is doing. So as we look into verses 4 through 10, as I mentioned, this is kind of the heart of this particular psalm, with the transition point coming at verse 11, which will be in the next section. So the psalmist is really intent here to recount their experience and basically calling others to experience it for themselves. So what did the psalmist experience? I sought the Lord and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. And then he turns it in verse 5. Look to him and be radiant, so that your faces shall never be ashamed. Here's what God did. Here's what you can do. And then in verse 6, this poor soul cried out and was heard by the Lord and was saved from every trouble. Again, this is what God has done for me. And then verse 7 says, the angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and delivers them. So it becomes not just what God has done for me, but what God does for the people who fear the Lord. And I want to make sure we understand the understanding of fear of the Lord is not cowering in fear. The way this word is, and again, it's one of those awkward translations from Hebrew to English, is this fear of the Lord is about being in awe and aware of God and God's power, not because we're frightened of it, but because it is just amazing. So this is not fear in how we use that word in the modern sense. And I still haven't figured out a great way to translate that, because it's more than just awe. It does have a part of kind of that overwhelming sense that God can do things beyond anything we can imagine. So it's more than just awed. So just so you know, that word fear is not fear of retribution. This is not fear of punishment. This is not, those who fear the Lord are not the ones who are cowering from God. These are the ones that truly understand the power and the magnificence and the glory and the awe, that just great sense of God, that there's nothing beyond God if God chooses to do it. So I think that's the understanding. So remembering that word fear is not fright. Some of the definitions you can think of is reverence, trust, and dependence on God. So these are other ways to think about it, but it's big. It's a big understanding of who God is. So again, just as a side note, so we'll get back into here. So again, this idea of fear. And then verse 8, again, is sort of an invitation. This is what will happen if you are one who fears the Lord. In verse 8, "Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Happy are those who take refuge in him." So when we have fear of the Lord, when we look to God as our source and authority and power, we are happy. We have this comfort that's bigger than what we can provide for ourselves. And then, of course, verse 8 is a straightforward call. "Oh, fear the Lord, you holy ones, for those who fear him have no want." And I think that's really interesting, because for us, not having want isn't having everything that we desire. But what having no want here means that we have everything we need to function, to live, to thrive. There's no mere materialistic sense to this want. And again, in verse 10, it reinforces verse 9, "The young lions suffer want and hunger, but those who seek the Lord lack no good thing." And again, a good thing is not the biggest house and the nicest car, or even the most public status. It's a different level of understanding that our wants, and our understanding, I would use the words, our needs would be met, because we use the word wants as our desires. And not all our desires will be fulfilled, and that's okay. If we are truly living in the way of God and recognizing God's power and authority, then we'll start to realize that our desires are not always godly or godful, nor where God calls us to be. So then, of course, as I'd mentioned, in the acrostic, verses 1, 11, and 22 make up the spelling of the first word of the Hebrew alphabet. And so 11 is the central point of this. And it comes with, "Come, O children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord." So again, this is where they pull out that sense of wisdom, part of the wisdom tradition here. But again, it uses that fear of the Lord. I will teach you how to recognize the authority, the power, the magnificence of God. And again, is to bring the other hearers, those who are listening to this psalm, in and saying, there's a place for you as well. I have something to offer you because of what I have experienced. I can bring you something and share with something about God that you may not have known yourself. So again, verses 11 through 14. And this is where the wisdom literature comes in, is, which of you desires life and covets many good days to enjoy? It's a legitimate question, right? I don't know too many people like, I would like to have lots of and I would like to live a long time and enjoy life. And so verses 13 and 14 then say, okay, this is what you need to do. This is how you need to respond. Keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking deceit. Depart from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. So as you think about that, I was like, okay, what do we need to do? Well, we need to avoid evil. We need to not speak evil. We need to not do evil. We need to do good. And how do we do good? It's staying connected to God. And then, of course, seek peace and pursue it. So do these things that are godly. So again, that's the wisdom piece. But again, this is the instruction. This is the calling into by the psalmist who's praising God to say, here's how you can be part of this resource. And then verses 15 through 22 bring the psalm to a conclusion. And now it talks about the comparison between the righteous and the evildoer. Again, like the wisdom's literature, there's the comparison between the righteous and the evil, righteous and unrighteous, the ones who do right and the ones who do wrong. So this is, again, why it also is listed as a wisdom psalm. So verses 19 through 22 talks about how the Lord rescues the righteous from their afflictions. The Lord protects them. And I love it. Keeps all their bones and none of them will be broken. Now I have to say, I've had enough broken bones in my life, so I don't take this particular verse literally, because, this has nothing to do with recklessness. This just had to be with kids being kids. But at the same time, like, there's people who'd be like, well, see, you have a broken arm, so God doesn't, this is poetry. Remember, everything doesn't need to be literal. And we don't need to take it literally. So verse 21 is that response of, if you are faithful, God will watch over you and protect you and guide you. But evil brings death to the wicked, and those who hate the righteous will be condemned. So that's that oppositional piece, right? This is what God does for the righteous. Here's what's going to happen to the evil or the wicked. And then the final verse 22 is an affirmation. The Lord redeems the life of his servants. None of those who take refuge in God will be condemned. And again, it's that reminder, like, God's done this great thing for you, for me, and God will do these great things for you as well. You can cry out to God, but when you cry out to God, recognize that God is listening for you and listening to you. And a reminder that the fear of God is not the reward in a materialistic sense, but instead the reward of fearing God, of being in awe of God, is actually having the understanding and of that God is nearby, that God is close to you. So this is not prosperity in a materialistic sense, or a social sense, or a power and influence sense. But again, this is a connection to the source of life. This is the connection to God. So fearing God leads to a deeper connection to God. It gives us what we need to get through life. Not that all problems will be resolved, not that you won't have difficulties in life, but that you are connected to the one who gives hope, who gives life, who brings salvation. So again, this is a psalm of thanksgiving, reminding us that God has done amazing things for this particular psalm. It's an individual, but if you read through those communal psalms, you'll see some of that same nature. Sometimes it'll tell stories like in Psalm 66 about the Israelites. God parted the waters and the people passed, it calls it the river, passed through the river dry. So again, recounting the deeds of God in an individual, it would be for their individual needs. For the community, it would be those communal remembrances of what God has done. So that is the songs of thanksgiving, or psalms of thanksgiving. And we're going to now move into royal psalms. And the royal psalms, let me pop this slide up here. The royal psalms are number 2, 18, 20, 21, 45, 72, 89, 101, 110, 132, 144. Now, the royal psalms are not a particular form, but actually they're grouped together based on their content. So these all have some reference to the monarchy, to the king of Israel or the king of Judea, and that is why they are brought together, considered royal psalms. Again, there aren't a huge number of those, but something to note as the way the psalms have been brought together is that the royal psalms occur at the seams of Psalm books 1, 2, and 3, and the seams is where they transition. So some commentators believe that is important, and that the psalms are scattered kind of throughout the Psalter. And what we've come to kind of understand as we read the psalms as part of a greater collection of stories, both in the Judaic and the Christian tradition, is that we give them more of a messianic orientation. This is what God will do when the Messiah comes. This is what a Messiah looks like, the Anointed One. So the royal psalms are poetic stories or praises of the kings, whether it was the Davidic dynasty or some of the other kings of Israel and Judea, but they also then express an ongoing hope that God will continue to manifest God's sovereignty in concrete ways through the life of God's people and the world. So they have kind of their original understanding, but then how they've been translated or understood throughout time. And again, just like anything else, we can't really place these in particular context. We don't, it doesn't name names in any of these psalms, so we don't know for sure who the author was or the exact context of why they were created, but they were created with purpose at the time, and they still give us insight and wisdom and guidance and theological hope and understanding, even if we don't use them in the same way the original writer had written them. So the royal psalms are recognized to have probably had a very historical, concrete place, but again, like so many, we don't know the exact time. They aren't dated, so we have no direct reference to what they were referring to. So again, we just look at them in their original context as poems around the monarchy, but then again, what do they mean for us today? So in today's example, we're going to use Psalm 45. Psalm 45 is one of the royal psalms. I'll give you a moment to get to that. Psalm 45. So as I read through this, I want you to understand that this is a very unique psalm, both in the Psalms itself and in the Old Testament, because it is actually a song of praise addressed to a human being, the king. And it looks like it would have been written for a royal wedding. So it would have been considered a love song or a wedding song. And this, again, probably written for an Israelite or Judean king that is marrying a princess from another country. So let's read Psalm 45. My heart overflows with a goodly theme. I address my verses to the king. My tongue is like the pen of a ready scribe. You are the most handsome of men. Grace is poured upon your lips. Therefore God has blessed you forever. Gird your sword on your thigh, O mighty one, in your glory and majesty. And your majesty ride on victoriously for the cause of truth and to defend the right. Let your right hand teach you dreaded deeds. Your arrows are sharp. In the heart of the king's enemies, the people fall under you. Your throne, O God, endures forever and ever. Your royal scepter is a scepter of equity. You love righteousness and hate wickedness. Therefore God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your companions. Your robes are all fragrant with myrrh and aloes and cassia. From ivory palaces, stringed instruments make you glad. Daughters of kings are among your ladies of honor. At your right hand stands the queen in gold of Ophir. Hear, O daughter, consider and incline your ear. Forget your people and your father's house, and the king will desire your beauty. Since he is your Lord, bow to him. The people of Tyre will seek your favor with gifts, the riches of the people with all kinds of wealth. The princess is decked out in her chamber with gold-woven robes. In many-colored robes she is led to the king. Behind her the virgins, her companions, follow. With joy and gladness they are led along as they enter the palace of the king. In the palace of ancestors you, O king, shall have sons. You will make them princes in all the earth. I will cause your name to be celebrated in all generations. Therefore the people will praise you forever and ever. So one of the questions that often comes up with commentators is, so why is this clearly a secular psalm included in the Psalms? It's not focused on God, and it's not necessarily directed towards God. So first of all, why was it included in the first place, and why then did it remain as an active part of the Psalm stories after the fall of the Israelite and Judean kingdoms? Well, first of all, it could be understood messianically, as I mentioned, both by the Jews and the Christians, that this is about the one who will be the Messiah, the one who comes now as the physical representation of God. And of course, a king back in those days is not a secular ruler, but rather he is the representative of God's sovereignty. So it is clearly a reminder to the king and the soon-to-be queen that they stand in God's stead, that their role is to, especially the is to be the physical manifestation of God, in the sense of to be righteous, to rule with equity, to rule with justice, to be the example of God on earth. Now, we also know that this had been abused multiple times, not just in any human kingdom. People start to think that that they were divinely appointed, therefore they can do whatever they want, instead of saying, I am here on God's behalf, instead of God appointed me, so now I can do whatever I choose, which again is that human greed, desire for power, human corruption, things of that nature. So again, though this psalm is a praise to the king, there's also some warning in it that he is to be the sovereign. He is supposed to be the one who rules on God's behalf in this world, and to be an agent of God for the people of God. So very important, and again, why it's easy connected to a messianic reality is the Messiah, the anointed, the chosen one of God, would be living in this reality as well. So let's look through this carefully and moving forward. So in verse 1, unlike any of the other Psalms, this author starts with kind of describing their task. So the phrase goodly theme is more kind of the idea of good word. My heart overflows with a goodly theme. I'm so excited I get to do this, is basically. I address my verses to the king. My tongue is like the pen of a ready scribe. It's directed to the king. It's quite clear there. The psalmist says, I am the one who gets to speak these words to the king. What a joyous opportunity. Now verses 2 through 5, especially the first part of verse 2, is understood of kind of the ancient Near Eastern understanding of kingship, that You are the most handsome of men, and grace is poured upon your lips. This is that idea of kingship is an outward ability, but the second part of verse 2 kind of describes the king's speaking ability. Grace is poured upon your lips. This is the king's fluency and ability to speak and influence people. And then, of course, the third part of that verse, therefore God has blessed you forever, is again stating that this is divine work, that you are king because God has chosen this. The king enjoys a special relationship with God, not because they are a god, but because God has appointed them to serve in this place. And I think that's where it's a challenge for us in humility, especially with people of leadership, to say, God has placed me here, not because I was better than anyone else, but because God wants me to work in godly ways in the world. And I think that's really important to think about and to move through in there. So then verses 3 and 4 are talking about the power and majesty, but again, not for the king's personal benefit. They're actually, again, to be agents of God's royal policy, to doing God's will. So in verses 3, gird your sword on your thigh, O Almighty One, in your majesty and glory. Now, Almighty One again refers to the king, not to God. And then in verse 4, your majestic ride on in your majesty ride on victoriously for the cause of truth and to defend the right. Let your right hand teach you dreaded deeds. So again, the purpose of this is to remind the king that the king serves as God's agent. The king doesn't serve for the king. The king serves because God has appointed the king to this place. And it's really important to remember that and to honor that in the reality. And then, of course, verse 5 says, your arrows are sharp in the heart of the king's enemies. The peoples fall under you. So again, you are the defender. You are the one who protects your people. You as you serve in God's way will be the one who defends the people from the enemies, and the enemies will fall. As we go into verses 6 and 7, they again reinforce verses 4 and 5. So the king is the one whom God has appointed and who embodies God's values. So your royal scepter is of equity. And again, I just want, before I get too far. So in verses 6, in my translation, it says, your throne, O God, endures forever. In here, that word God is not, make sure I have the right verse here. So the address to the king in verse 6, where it says God, is the word Elohim. And the name is most frequently used for God. As we see in my verse, it has a capital G. But it can be used as a designation for human beings who are authorized and exercise God-given authority over others. So Moses was referred to as Elohim over Aaron in Exodus chapter 4, verse 16. And then in Exodus 7, verse 1, Moses is God to Pharaoh. So it's someone who's acting on God's behalf, who is using God's authority, God-given authority. So in verse 6, though it says capital G like it's the divine God, it could also be an address to the king. So your throne, O divine one, endures forever and ever. Again, that would be a common thing, right? We have long live the king. It's that same sort of idea. But then verse 6 and 7 follow, is like verse 7, you love righteousness and hate wickedness. Therefore God, your God, see it says therefore God, it should be a little g, or Elohim, the king, your God, big G, the divine, has anointed you. And with the oil of gladness beyond your companions, your robes are all fragrant with myrrh. So now we have this kind of expounding of, which seems strange, like why would we have this dialogue about the king's wardrobe? But the fact is that is a reminder of authority and prestige. It reminds us that we are talking about a God, an earthly being, but these are all examples of royal authority, influence, things of that nature. So as we kind of look at verses 8, your robes are all fragrant with myrrh and aloes and cassia. These are all very sensual. Like if you know what those smells are, you would automatically know what that means. And basically they're expensive perfumes. They're fragrances that are not everyday. They're also, again, things that would have been used in royal anointings, royal burials, things of that nature. So they have that royal element to them. And then as we get further into verses 8 and 9, it talks not only about kind of the king's garment, but then it talks about the bride's, the prestigious nature of the bride, and her elegant attire, and then it gets us ready to be introduced to the soon-to-be queen in the verses of 9. So daughters of kings are among your ladies of honor, and at your right hand stands the queen in gold of Ophir. So again, there's this, we see this royal pomp and circumstance, and as we get ready for the coronation of the new King of England, we're going to start seeing some of that pomp and ceremony as that coronation starts to happen as well. So, you know, we see, we carry some places with pomp and ceremony, with the, the swearing in of our president. We see some pomp and ceremony. There's certain things that go on, bands and all sorts of other things to create this understanding that something really powerful and amazing is happening. And this is kind of what the psalmist is writing here. Like, this is something that is not an everyday ordinary experience or an everyday ordinary event. Something amazing is going on. And it is people of divine influence. They are people who represent God. So again, that moves forward. So then in verses 10 through 17, first we hear a little bit about the queen. Verses 10 through 15 focus on the queen. And it is about her participation in the wedding ceremony, and then encouraging her to embrace her new relationship, which one involves submission to the king, which then also will bring recognition and honor to her, but also to remember that now her loyalty lays with God and the people of God that she serves. And I think this is an interesting reality. The kingship, in our modern day understanding, a king is someone who rules over people, but doesn't have accountability to them. But the true understanding of a king is someone who's actually responsible for. So not only do they rule over, but they're actually responsible for the people under their care. And this is why when they talk about the kings of Israel, the kings of Judea, when they're not doing their job, when they're not representing God, they are self-serving. Their purpose is to serve on God's behalf, which is a God who seeks out justice for the poor, the one who releases the oppressed. This is the God that they are to serve, and how they are to serve in the world. So she is affirmed into this reality that she is now going into this this kingdom that is a divinely led kingdom. This is a kingdom led by Adonai, the Lord God. And so she will be coming into that relationship, and a part of that is to recognize the king as an agent of God, but also then she herself serves as an agent because she is marrying into this. So the people, of course, will bow down to the king, but they will also seek her favor because, of course, she has some influence. And so she also needs to be honored and remembered. And so, of course, then the second half of verse 12, or the last phrase of verse 12, and then in 14, talks about kind of the nature of how she comes in. So we talked about the king's robes being ornate and defining. So are the queens. These are definitely special event clothing. They are not your common everyday clothes. They are definitely ceremonial in nature, and it recognizes her status in this situation. And then, of course, having her companions following her, whether you want to use virgins or young women, in that translation of verse 14, she has her handmaidens, her ladies in waiting, however you want to use that. Again, part of this kingdom royal court setting. But again, it's a status, it's a sign of their influence and power to have these people as well. So then verses 16 and 17 are now anticipating kind of the future, the continuation of the dynasty, that the king will have sons and they will be princes, and God will make them princes. And then, of course, the psalmist says, I will cause your name to be celebrated in all generations. Therefore, the people will praise you forever and ever. So one of the natures of understanding authority is to have your name remembered. Now, what's so funny about this is the psalm doesn't actually name the king. So the psalmist says, this song will make you remembered forever and ever, but we don't actually have the king's name. So we have the psalm, and we have the psalmist saying you'll be remembered forever, but we actually don't have a name, which is okay because then it allows this psalm to be used in multiple weddings, and most likely was used in more than the original wedding it was written for. And maybe that's why there isn't a particular name of a king in the psalm itself. We don't know that. But the psalmist also kind of makes themselves kind of the focus, right? They started with kind of I, and they end with I. I get to create this so that you can be remembered. So it's just a wonderful reality. One of the other thoughts that a commentator has in verse 17 is, again, the I might be the poet, but the I might be God, that God is the one who's promising and the one who will make the king's name remembered. I lean towards it was probably the poet, not God, not the voice of God all of a sudden jumping in at the end. But again, it's poetry. Not everything needs to be read in a particular way. It allows for some creativity of the reader because it also used creativity by the writer. So that is a psalm, a royal psalm. Again, unique in that it was written about a king and his queen rather than being about God. The other psalms mention the royal court, but they're still God-centered. They're still focused on God and then what God is doing. So it's just an interesting reminder. So as you read some of those other royal psalms, you can compare and contrast against this one. So as I've encouraged you in the past, read some of the psalms that were listed. I encourage you to share your favorite down in the comment section. And if you want to expound on why you found it so appealing, please do so. If you want to just share the psalm, but the reason why you were drawn to it is too personal and you'd like to talk more about it, reach out to me through my social media or my email address, and I'll be more than happy to have that conversation as well. As I'd mentioned, all the slides with the numbers of the psalms will be posted here in just a moment. So you can pause the video if you want to write those down, or if you're on a computer and you want to screenshot it, you're welcome to do that. So just wanted to make sure you knew those were coming and you can be prepared. As always, thank you for joining me. Continue to comment on the YouTube channel or contact me through my social media or email. And as we move forward into episode 4, we are going to look at examples of trust psalms and acrostic poems. So those are our two. So trust psalms and acrostic poems. Grace and peace be with you.